I loved you from the first moment I saw you, and you knew it. You tried to escape from it. I had to let you learn to accept it.
There was a time when silence on screen could say more than words ever could. For many, that face belonged to Gary Cooper. He didn't need many words. He didn't need grand gestures. On screen, he stood for something steady, something certain. But off-screen, the truth was more complicated. Because behind that calm presence was a man who loved more than once, deeply, differently, and sometimes in ways he could never fully explain. Some of those relationships faded with time. Some were left unfinished, but before the end of his life, one truth remained. Only one woman truly stayed in his heart, and perhaps, in remembering his story, you may find yourself remembering something of your own. Before we step into the private life of this Hollywood legend, tell me, which Gary Cooper film still stays with you the most? Where Desire First Took Hold, Clara Bow. Before the awards, before the legend, there was a young man trying to find his place in a world that moved faster than he spoke. When Gary Cooper first arrived in Hollywood, he wasn't yet the symbol of quiet strength. He was uncertain, observant, almost invisible. And then came Clara Bow. She was everything he wasn't: bright, fearless, alive with energy. Known as the It Girl, Clara didn't wait for attention. She commanded it, and somehow, in that whirlwind, she noticed him. Their connection wasn't built on promises. It was built on timing. Late nights, shared sets, quiet conversations between scenes. For Cooper, it was something new. The realization that desire didn't have to be spoken to be understood. Clara helped open a door for him in Hollywood, not just professionally, but personally. She showed him a world where emotions weren't restrained, where attraction wasn't hidden behind silence. But it didn't last. It was never meant to. Clara belonged to the moment, fast, intense, and fleeting. And Cooper, even then, was something different. He was already searching for something steadier, even if he didn't yet understand what that meant. Still, she left something behind. A beginning. Because, with Clara Bow, Gary Cooper learned the difference between admiration and longing. And in the years to come, that quiet lesson would follow him into every relationship, every choice, and every regret. Sometimes, the first spark doesn't stay, but it teaches you how to feel. The wife who chose to stay. Veronica Balfe. By the time Gary Cooper met Veronica Balfe, the noise of Hollywood had already begun to surround him. Fame was no longer a possibility. It was becoming his reality. But Veronica was different from the world he was stepping into. She came from refinement, from structure, from a life untouched by the chaos of studio lights and whispered rumors. Where others were drawn to his rising stardom, she seemed drawn to something quieter in him, something steady, something real. They married in 1933, and for a moment, it seemed like Gary Cooper had found what many men in Hollywood never did: a sense of home. Veronica offered him stability, not excitement, not intensity, but something far rarer in his world: peace. They built a life together, a daughter, a rhythm that felt grounded, even as his career soared higher with every passing year. But Hollywood has a way of testing even the strongest foundations. As Cooper's fame grew, so did the distance between the man the world admired and the man who returned home. Long absences, quiet silences, unspoken truths that lingered just beneath the surface. Veronica saw it. She understood more than she ever said. And when the weight of his choices finally led to separation years later, it wasn't anger that defined her. It was endurance. Because she didn't leave the story. She stayed. Not because it was easy, but because somewhere beneath the mistakes, she still saw the man she had chosen in the beginning. And sometimes, the strongest love isn't the loudest one. It's the one that remains, even after everything has tried to break it. The love that felt different. Ingrid Bergman. By the early 1940s, Gary Cooper was no longer simply a rising actor. He was a symbol. To audiences, he looked like certainty itself, the man who stood tall, spoke softly, and carried honor in his silence. But by then, his private life had already begun to drift far from that image. Then came Ingrid Bergman. She was not like the women who had passed through his life before. Ingrid had warmth, intelligence, and a kind of emotional openness that could disarm even the most guarded man. When they worked together, during For Whom the Bell Tolls, something shifted. This was not just attraction built on beauty, timing, or the thrill of two stars meeting under studio lights. It felt deeper than that, quieter, more dangerous. On screen, their chemistry was undeniable. Off-screen, it grew into something Hollywood could sense, even when no one said it aloud. In Ingrid, Cooper seemed to find not just admiration, but understanding. She was able to reach the part of him that so often stayed hidden, the lonely, restless man behind the composed face. That was what made this connection different. With Ingrid, there was tenderness. Not just desire, but the suggestion of emotional refuge. For a man divided between duty and longing, that kind of bond could feel almost irresistible. But real life was waiting beyond the set. Gary was still married. His public image still mattered. And like so many Hollywood romances born under intense lights, this one lived in a suspended world that could not last forever. What felt powerful in private became impossible in reality. So it ended, not with peace and not without leaving a mark, because some relationships do not collapse in anger. They fade with a sadness that stays much longer. For Gary Cooper, Ingrid Bergman was not the woman who changed everything, but she may have been the first woman who made him feel that love could reach him in a different way. A feeling can pass and still remain with you for years. The affair that changed everything, Patricia Neal. By the time Gary Cooper met Patricia Neal, he was already living two lives. One the world admired, and one he quietly carried alone. But Patricia Neal was not someone who could exist in the background. When they came together during the Fountainhead in 1948, something immediate took hold. It wasn't soft like before. It wasn't fleeting. It was intense, direct, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. She challenged him, matched him, saw through the calm image he had perfected for years. And for perhaps the first time, Gary Cooper didn't seem like a man in control. He seemed human. Their relationship quickly moved beyond secrecy into something emotionally consuming. This wasn't just an affair. It became a space where Cooper felt understood in a way that went deeper than admiration or attraction. But reality was waiting. He was still married to Veronica Balfe. His public image still mattered. And the life he had built could not simply be abandoned. Then came the moment that changed everything. Patricia became pregnant, and suddenly, what had been passion turned into consequence. Cooper made a choice, one that would follow both of them for the rest of their lives. He refused to leave his wife, and urged Patricia toward a decision that left emotional scars neither of them would fully escape. That was the end, not just of the relationship, but of something deeper. Because after Patricia Neal, love was no longer simple for Gary Cooper. It carried weight, regret, memory. Some relationships don't just pass through your life, they divide it into before and after. The temptation at his peak. Grace Kelly. By the early 1950s, Gary Cooper had reached the height of his fame. He was no longer chasing success, he had become it. To the world, he was the embodiment of quiet strength, a man who stood above the chaos of Hollywood. But inside, the conflict remained. And then came Grace Kelly. She was everything the moment demanded. Young, radiant, impossibly composed. Where earlier relationships had been complicated, Grace felt almost effortless. There was a calm elegance to her, a presence that didn't challenge Cooper the way Patricia Neal had. but instead offered something lighter, more immediate. They worked together during high noon, and like so many moments in his life, the line between performance and reality began to blur. Their connection was quiet, but unmistakable, not built on deep emotional struggle, but on attraction, timing, and the undeniable pull between two people at the center of Hollywood's spotlight. But this was not a beginning. It was something else. By now, Cooper was a man shaped by his past choices. The intensity he once allowed himself with Patricia Neal was no longer there. What remained was a quieter pattern, connection without permanence, closeness without consequence. He was willing to face again. Grace Kelly represented a different kind of chapter, not the woman who changed him, but the moment that revealed he had already changed. Because even as the world admired them, there was a distance beneath it all, a sense that whatever this was, it would not last, and it didn't. Grace moved forward into a life that would take her far beyond Hollywood, and Cooper remained where he had always been, caught between who he was and who he could never fully become. Some moments feel like love, but they arrive too late to mean it. The silence that followed. Irene Lentz. By the time Gary Cooper reached the later years of his life, something had changed. The energy that once pulled him toward intensity had softened. The choices that once felt immediate now carried echoes. Hollywood still moved around him. The lights were still there. The admiration hadn't faded. But inside, things were quieter. It was during this period that he grew close to Irene Lentz. She was not a rising star or a public sensation. She lived behind the scenes, shaping how others appeared, never asking to be seen herself. Perhaps that was part of the connection. With Irene, there was no performance, no expectation to live up to an image, just conversation, presence, and a kind of calm that had been missing from much of his earlier life. Their bond wasn't loud. It didn't carry the intensity of Patricia Neal or the brightness of Grace Kelly. It existed in a quieter space, one that felt more reflective than passionate. And yet, it mattered. Because by now, Gary Cooper understood something he hadn't before. Not every connection needed to be dramatic to be real. Not every feeling needed to be acted upon to be felt deeply. But time was no longer generous. His health was fading. The years ahead were fewer than the years behind. And in that narrowing space, the past seemed closer than ever. After his passing, Irene's story took a tragic turn, one that cast a long, quiet shadow over this final chapter of connection, not because of scandal, but because of how deeply some bonds can linger, even when they are never fully defined. And so, what remained was not noise, but silence. A silence filled with memories, choices, and the weight of everything left unsaid. The one woman he truly loved. In the final years of his life, Gary Cooper no longer needed to impress anyone. The roles had been played. The legacy was already written. What remained were the memories, not the applause, not the success, but the people. There had been many women in his life, each bringing something different. Some offered excitement, some offered peace, some stayed, some left. But only one had changed him in a way he could never fully return from. Patricia Neal. She was not the easiest love, not the safest, and certainly not the one that fit into the life he had built. But she was the one who reached him the deepest. With Patricia, there were no walls strong enough to hide behind, no quiet distance to retreat into. She saw him, not the image, not the legend, but the man beneath it all. And for a time, he allowed himself to feel everything he had spent years holding back. That was why it stayed. Not because it lasted, but because it didn't. Because the choice he made to return to Veronica Balfe, to protect the life he had built, came at a cost he carried quietly for the rest of his years. He lived with that decision. And in the silence that followed, one truth became clear. The woman he stayed with was not the same as the woman who stayed within him. And sometimes, the greatest love of your life is the one you couldn't choose. In the end, Gary Cooper left behind more than films. He left behind a quiet reminder that even the strongest men carry unseen battles. Love, for him, was never simple. It was shaped by choices, by timing, and by the things he could never undo. And perhaps that's why his story still lingers, because somewhere in it we recognize our own. Before you go, tell me, how old are you, and where are you watching from? And if this story stayed with you, consider subscribing for more quiet, untold stories from the golden age of Hollywood.